Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Reds Rundown podcast, hosted by two lifelong Reds fans and journalists. I'm Rob. He's Joe, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Joe, I know you had a great weekend. The Reds did not, but how are you in general?
Oh, doing great. Had a friend from out of town come in. Had some fun times with him. Went to the Reds game on Friday. Saw some pretty historic stuff, even if it wasn't in the Reds' favor. And I'm feeling pretty good personally, even if the Reds' feelings are still the same.
Yeah, it was a historic weekend for the Reds, in the worst possible way. Joe, definitely disappointing, I think, for any Reds fan. But I know you and I have been we're struggling with our red legs to say the least. So yeah, I guess we'll jump into the question of the day as well, Joe. What do you think of the Reds trade deadline? We're going to talk about that on the show today. If you forgot, the trade deadline was on Tuesday this past week. I know I was checking my phone pretty much every second that I could, Joe, as we got closer and closer, only to see that we traded Austin Slater. Very, very big deal for us. I'm glad that we got that last second deal in before the end of the trade deadline. So really proud of the Reds for that one. We'll go through, like I said, something a little bit more, I guess, intense. I don't know, whatever word you want to call it. Here momentarily. I'm pulling up the recaps as we speak, Joe, but I'll get started for now. The Reds started last week pretty well. 7-1 win over the Cubs. Jameson Taillon had been pitching very well. You and I both thought Carson Spires versus Taillon would be a little tougher. Michael Busch, the only run for the Cubs. The Reds, though, were great. Benson home run, Friedel home run, a big home run for Friedel specifically. Candy with a home run as well. Like I said, Spires going 5 innings, 2 walks, 4 strikeouts, lowering his ERA at that point to a 3.46. He has been, I think, a huge surprise for both of us, and eventually we'll have to give him his due in a conversation, maybe even today. Uh, the Reds then go on Tuesday on trade deadline day. They do end up winning after all the news has been made, 6-3, with a big start of a couple of weeks here, or a couple of games here for Santiago Espinal. Big home run for him. He is finding his power later than we would have ever expected, but that's okay. It was a bullpen day for the Reds. Tony Santillan starting things off because Frankie Montas was supposed to start this game. He was gone. Nick Martinez came in. Lyon Richardson came in also and struggled, but the rest of the bullpen, for the most part, were able to hold it down. And we were able to start off the week 2-0, which was, I think, a pretty big surprise to both of us. Then the Wednesday game, unfortunately, Lodolo was not at his best, to say the least. Felt like the Reds kind of left him out there to, as a sacrificial lamb for the bullpen day the game before. But him and newly acquired Jacob Junis were not able to get the job done. Jake Fraley did hit a home run to bring the Reds within 3 at one point, but it would not end up being enough for them. We head to the Friday game, the game that Joe was at, a historic game where the Reds would unfortunately be no hit by Blake Snell. And I want to take a second and talk about this game, Joe. You were there. And I will say, I put it out there on Twitter with you. We were busy, running around with my family. I was watching Deadpool as well at this time. But by the time that the fifth inning had come around and I was watching him, uh, you know, watching Snell pitch, I could tell that he was not only on, but he had no hit stuff from the first inning, like you said. And I said in the fifth to my dad, I was like, yeah, this guy might throw a no hitter tonight. Um, that ended up being the case, Joe. Can you give us a little bit of a breakdown on what you were seeing and just your thoughts being able to be at a no hitter? I know it wasn't for the Reds, but at least it was probably interesting to be there for it.
Oh, It was really weird vibes in the stadium because about the fifth or sixth inning, you know, my friend Tom and I had already talked like after the first inning, like he looks good. He might be throwing a no hitter. We struggle against lefties, the rain delay, whatever. Going into it, we were like, this might happen. Like friend Tom was getting mad about all his bets already. Like, I don't know, my bets might be going down the drain because he had Reds win and like an Ellie home run and a steer hit. Yeah, it was weird because Snell had really good stuff. It was not always strikeout stuff. He did get some strikeouts, but he did lose control. He walked a couple batters, more than you usually see in a no hitter, at least from our perspective. And then um, the Reds probably had like one hard hit ball all game, and that was it. Like he was like even when the bats were hitting it, it was pop ups. It was nothing. About the fifth or sixth inning, I personally changed my stance and I was like, I'm rooting for this thing. I want the no hitter. Reds aren't winning today. There's no chance. We're not making the playoffs. I've never seen a no hitter. I saw the cycle last year. I was at the LA game for the cycle. No hitters never happened. I need to see a perfect game, but that's down the line. And also, in a different way, cheering for Blake Snell because I don't know how many Reds fans really remember this, but the Rays used to pull him all the time. And I hate managers that pull pitchers who are dealing. Specifically in that playoff game a couple of years ago when they pulled him, I was livid. That was the dumbest decision you can make. Just awful. So I was cheering for him to get the no hitter because he was a guy who has recorded 5 outs past the seventh inning in his career. Crazy. They never let him go far in games. Just I don't even know. So I went from fourth, fifth inning, like I'm kind of done with this Reds team. People can say, "Oh, you're not the greatest Reds fan." More than anything, I'm a baseball fan. I grew up cheering for all the cheering for the Reds number one, cheering for all the teams, like being awestruck about Mike Piazza or this guy or that guy. It was amazing. I was happy to watch it. A lot of the Reds fans in our section, we were way out, in the bleachers, but a lot of Reds fans in our section actually, cheered for him after he got the perfect game. It was really cool to see. And I love that Blake Snow after doing it was like, oh, all that BS you guys talk about, I can't go far in games is just BS because I just did it. I'm like, yes, thank you for a guy who is clearly a victim of this new age of like we got to pull the pitcher, we got to pull the pitcher. When he's a guy who was like you should trust this guy. He was such a good pitcher, and he still is a very good pitcher, even though he's only pitched in 12 games this year. I think that was good to see, and I'm glad that he stuck it to some of the analytics guys in the process. So it was a fun event to be able to see. Miserable for the Reds, but it was kind of like the same thing we've been seeing all season, so it didn't really change anything for me.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see, how new age analytics have changed, and I think Hunter Greene has actually been surprising me with the amount of length that he has been given by David Bell, and I'm hoping that we'll start to see that a little bit more, in the future. Because when I saw that it was only 5 innings past the seventh, ever for Snell, I was shocked. I mean, he's been one of the best pitchers. He has, I know he had a Cy Young award last year. He has two, right? Doesn't he have one when he was with the Rays as well? I want to
I
say.
believe he does. I'll check real quick.
Yeah, so like absolutely crazy to me that, this man has done what he's done and then that nobody went out and signed him. I remember you and I talking about it at some point. It may have even been on an early episode of this podcast, Joe, but like I was convinced convinced that the Reds might as well just go out and sign him. If nobody else is going to, give him on a 1 year deal. I remember us having that conversation. I can't remember if you convinced me or if I was already convinced when we got to our conversation, but like it just didn't make sense to me that this guy who's been very good, most of the time great, for such a long time was not getting more love. So I was happy for him. I was sad for the Reds, but that is what that is. While you're looking this up, I'm going to move on to the Saturday game. The Reds did win this game. Hunter Greene was immaculate. One hit, 11 strikeouts, one walk, lowered his ERA to a 2.83 for the season. We're going to talk about Hunter Greene here in a little bit. The Reds pretty much only hit home runs this weekend, Joe. Ty Steve had two, India had one, and Stu Fairchild had one. The Giants would try to bring it back in the latter portion of the game, the latter third, scoring all four of their runs in the seventh, eighth, and ninth innings. But Diaz was able to nail it down after doing what he seemingly does, which is give up a run almost every inning. But hey, a save's a save. It was his 22nd on the year. Reds win 6-4. Last game, Sunday's game, Reds go up early, 2-0 on Robbie Ray. It was looking good. Carson Spires, honestly, again, was twirling up a great game. Sadly, he ends up taking the loss here, 8-3, but he only gave up 3 runs on 5 hits, 5 strikeouts, 2 home runs, would end up being the catalyst for him. But it was Fernando Cruz, who yet again struggled mightily, could not get an out. 3 earned runs given up, including a home run. His ERA has ballooned to a 5.28 at this point, Joe. I am pretty done with Fernando Cruz at this point, sadly. He was a great story, but it just is not enough. I think it may be over. Those few months that he had were great, but they need to put him on the injured list or something to get him out of there. Because if David Bell keeps putting him in close games, I may have an aneurysm. I am not exaggerating. It is my blood pressure rises every time. I've stopped watching the games when he comes in, Joe. That is to the point that I've gotten at this point because I know he's going to at least give up one, and I'm just going to have to, get over it. So that was the Reds' week, Joe. It ended up being a 3-3 week. I was 1 game off. You were 1 game off. It finished right in the middle of us, as it always seems to do. Um, so the Reds are still not in the playoff hunt, really. I mean, they're not out of it technically. They really aren't. I know everybody probably wants to beat me up for saying that. Like they're really not. It takes one good week and they're within probably a game or two. But it's just the other teams that are in the real hunt right now are starting to heat up, and the Reds are cooling off in a significant way. Ugh, but we had the trade deadline, Joe, and I thought maybe the Reds might do something because they made a couple moves that surprised me early on. And I thought, okay, maybe they're actually trying to go do something here. Maybe they're trying to not just reposition, but actually get better. Now, technically, I will say this. I think the Reds got better over the trade deadline, but it just was not better enough in my mind. Like, not in a way that I would be um, not in a way that I'd be happy about. Because here's the deal. Here's who left: Frankie Montas, Austin Slater, Levon Soto, Lucas Sims, and Andrew Salcedo. None of those guys were in your immediate plans for the Reds or even future plans for the Reds to be good. I think you were happy that Sims was gone. I was happy that Montas was gone. Slater wasn't doing anything. Soto came up and did absolutely nothing. And Salcedo is a guy who's a little bit on the older side for a younger catcher. He can't hit really. So we'll see if he ever pans out. But that's the only potential loss, true loss that the Reds would have. They did bring in Ty France, which is intriguing to me. Everybody's best friend cash considerations. So, we'll see if that matters to any degree. Ovis Portez, who's an interesting arm from the Red Sox. Joey Weimer, Jacob Junis, and David Wenzel. Or Davis, not David. In my mind, the Reds technically got better. Ty France, Ovis Portez, and Joey Weimer are all interesting pieces. Now, I don't know. I'm going to look this up, Joe. I don't know what the Ty France contract situation is. Like, I can't remember if he's in arbitration or anything. I know he's signed a new deal with the Mariners. I'm going to assume that he's technically no. He still has ARB 3 next year. So the Reds still will have the option to have Ty France next year. And I know Joey Weimer is still at the beginning of his, and Ovis Portez is years away. He's only 19 years old. I doubt we will see him for at least 3 to 4 years. But he is an interesting arm, and a lot of people think he was rising up the Red Sox um, list of prospects. It's just that he's just a reliever, probably. And so, you trade Lucas Sims for that guy. I want to get your thoughts, Joe. Clearly, you're hearing mine. Like, I still think the Reds technically got better, but it just doesn't feel like it matters ultimately, unless if Ty France and Joey Weimer and Jacob Junis like really figure it out. Jacob Junis has actually been a pretty solid reliever. I don't want to overstate that. He's been solid for the last few years. So I don't want to underestimate the acquisition of Junis. I know he didn't look good in his first outing with the Reds, but I promise he will get comfortable and figure it out. The problem is I just don't remember if his. I'm gonna look this up too. I don't think his contract is past this year is the problem. So I don't really understand what they were trying. I think they just really wanted Joey Weimer's for some reason, which we can talk about. But Talk to me about where you're at with this trade deadline, Joe. What are you seeing here? Yeah, he has a mutual option for next year. Jacob Junis does, but it's for 7 million. I doubt the Reds are going to take that. So we'll get 2 months of Jacob Junis, and that'll be about it.
Yeah, so first off, Blake Snell did win the Cy Young in 2018 as well. 1.89 ERA
Awesome.
that year, and last year 2.25. You're right, we did talk about signing him in the offseason, probably before the podcast started. He has not had the greatest year, still, even with that no hitter, 4.29 ERA. But if you think about, we just traded a guy with a 5 ERA. That makes it interesting. He is on a 2-year deal with the Giants. First year is 23.5 million. The second year is 38.5 player option. So the Reds could have maybe afforded him and had that luxury of having the first year not be as big as the second year. And that's, maybe do a mutual option or something. That could have been something interesting for this team with a guy who has shown he can win in big moments. Now, with the trade deadline, Rob, I hated it. I don't think the Reds got better. I think they, if anything, stayed the same. And I think we were lied to by the front office as well. And I think that's a big issue. Was we wanted to give this team a chance to make a run. Okay, well you traded Frankie Montas. Right now we're going with 4 starters, and I'm not thinking Frankie Montas is like great, but you can
Yeah.
eat innings or something. We have 4 starters. We're doing bullpen days. We're trading guys who aren't going to be back next year, like Lucas Sims. Who I've had my problems with over the years, but we trade him and we keep some of the other guys like Fernando Cruz. So are we really trying? Or what are we doing? We're in the middle like we always are. We never have a clear strategy. And at the end of the day, we shed contracts and kept money for the future, all while saying we want to give this team a chance to make a run, but at the same time, not helping them do so. So, getting Ty France, low cost acquisition, that's fine. He was DFA'd, so I'm not really too excited about this. But if he works out, he works out. It wasn't that high cost. That's fine. Cash considerations also on the list here. The favorite thing of the Reds. It's fine if you do that, but then go use the money next offseason. Because if you don't use the money next offseason, then we just get these B or C level free agents like we continue to do, and it doesn't do anything. It doesn't move the needle. Portez has some potential, but that's way, way, way down the line. Weimer has been really bad in his career. I do not like the Weimer acquisition. Eunice is fine, either. At the end of the day, uh, we traded a lot of guys to shed salary. I don't think it makes our team better for the future. I think it gives us more money, but again, if we don't use it, it doesn't matter. Lucas Sims, I will say, very good with the Red Sox so far. He's in a different role. What, who would have thought? In a different role, he could do something great. We just keep on putting him in the eighth inning, and he can keep on losing games for us. So that just highlights our bullpen mismanagement. I know, Rob, you mentioned Fernando Cruz. Would have loved to trade him because I think we all knew it was an apparition that he had a couple good months, and that was it. So very, very down on the Reds for the trade deadline. I'm excited with maybe the low cost that we got for some of these acquisitions, but it was a seller's market. We could have gotten so much for some of our relievers. And the thing is, I think we decided to trade Lucas Sims not just because his contract's up after the year, Rob, but because we have so many relievers right now who are on the IL that we expect back. Whether it's Suter's on the IL, Pagan's on the IL, Antone's on the IL, Jabot's on the IL. That is 4 guys who should be in the big leagues, whether we like them or not. Should be in the big leagues in the bullpen. I get it. That's like a future move that we're trading Lucas Sims. We're not going to re-sign him anyway because we have all these guys. But I did not like it at all. When our best acquisition is probably probably the guy who got DFA'd. I'm good at the low cost of it, but are we trading? Are we buying or selling? Neither. And I think that's the worst thing to do at a trade deadline. It's probably going to miss the playoffs now. They're probably not going to have a lot more prospects for the future years. They do have more cash. So the way I will be corrected about this or be happy about this for next year is if they go invest that cash. I just don't see that happening given the history of the Reds, because it's the same old every trade deadline. The prices were not the right way. Wasn't the right way. We want to give this team a chance to make a run. We don't have any chance, or we want to, this team is good as is. We don't need an acquisition to help them move forward, and that's the frustrating thing about being a Reds fan. I don't really think it's a problem if fans end up checking out at this point, just because this has shown that they don't have faith in this team either.
Yeah, I will say when I say they got better, I don't really think they need Montas. Like I don't think I look at it as is Montas going to really help them make the playoffs? Probably not. Is Slater going to help them make the playoffs? Probably not. Sims, most likely not, and Soto and Salcedo don't matter. I do think that France can. I think they're taking a shot in the dark on Weimer. He was once a top prospect. He's still only 25 and has a chance to be something. And Ovis Cortez, I think, is interesting. I think, to be clear, by a technicality, I do think they got better as an organization. But ultimately, again, like you said, in a seller's market, in an opportunity where you're still only 5 games out. This screams to me that they don't believe in this team, or that for some stupid reason the front office is being held back by the true front office, the top of the top. Because it's insane to me that some of these deals that got done. I mean, like look at Eloy Jimenez. Like the White Sox did not get back nearly as much as you would have thought, and he's hitting the crap out of the ball because he's in a place that he wants to be. These White Sox players, like Luis Roberts, the fact that the White Sox were unwilling to trade him and Garrett Crochet, wild to me. First off, secondly, the A's not wanting to trade like Brent Rooker and Wendell, right? Yeah, Wendell. Like these, like if they weren't willing to trade, like make a deal that they can't refuse. Like it's just like I really wonder what Luis Roberts would have done for this team, Joe. I feel like I've said it every single week, but I'm like looking at myself right now and I'm like, okay, Ty France is an interesting acquisition. I just don't know what place he has on this team next year. To be honest with you, we'll have to figure that out. And if he can get back to being a guy who can hit 280 and 25 home runs a year, because I think he'd have that extra five here in Cincinnati instead of in Seattle, where it's impossible to hit a home run. Not impossible, but hard. That is an interesting acquisition to me. They're taking a chance on a guy who has had one bad year in the last like 4 years. I'm cool with that. I have no issue with that. I think Ty France could even help them this year pretty substantially. But it ultimately, like you said, does not matter when they did have that opportunity, especially with relievers. I was expecting them to ship off like 3 or 4 more relievers at least. If you don't think you're going to make a run, ship them out. Be done. But he's like, well, we're going to try to keep them and whatever. It was baloney. I just wonder what the plan is. I hope that they're just stalling because they think next year is going to be the year when McLean is able to come back and everything. And I don't know if you saw, but apparently McLean has a slight stress fracture in one of his ribs now. I can only imagine that that's from overdoing it, trying to protect his arm. That's how a lot of injuries happen, is when one happens and it's in a similar area. It's because you're overcompensating in that area to protect the one area. It doesn't sound like it's very significant. They expect him to be able to still be able to come back and everything, but it just feels like he is doomed to be able to be not injured at this point, Joe. So I'd hope that they don't keep him back. I'm not going to disagree with you on the trade deadline. I still think it was an abject, I'm going to call it almost a disaster compared to what it should have been, what it could have been, had they had actually made a decision to go one way or the other. The only thing I will say is, by a technicality, I do think the team got better. Just because I don't think that any of the guys that they gave up were going to really help them now or in the future. Whereas I think the guys that they got back, I think old Joey Weimer could be an interesting piece. I think Inovis Portez and I think a Ty France, I think all of them could be interesting. And if for some reason Jacob Junis just is absolute lights out, invest the $7 million. You already saved double that with the Montage trade and with the Sims trade. So if you really think he's going to be something great for your bullpen for next year, you can take that $7 million mutual option. I'm assuming he probably will, because I doubt he's going to get a better offer on the market during this offseason. So you can do that too, I guess, if you really want to. But it is disappointing considering what we saw. The last thing I will say is it was probably what was one of the busier trade deadlines I can remember, Joe. It's one of the least star-studded trade ones that I've ever seen. And I know that was pointed out by on MLB Network as well. And I thought about it. They're obviously they're right, but it was like, wow, you're right. Like I just kept seeing all these moves, but it didn't feel like anybody major was really moving in a lot of these. It was buy lows on some players who've been not great. So a weird trade deadline year for everybody, but especially for the Reds, where they technically got better, but yeah.
I disagree with you. They did not technically get better. If our best acquisition was a DFA guy, I mean, it's cool to take a low investment, but I really don't see how this helps this team. Joey Weimer, I do not think provides too much value. He's in AAA. He's already struggling down there. Jacob Junis may or may not be back next year, so it doesn't really help you. And also, I'm not a Frankie Montes guy. I was highly critical of him when he was here, and I will stay that way. We traded him to a division team that is trying to make the playoffs and is going to try to win a World Series this year. We now have 4 starting pitchers, one of them being Carson Spires, who's had a great year for him. but I think we can all agree the Fernando Cruz drop off could be coming here soon. And I don't want, because we traded Frankie, and again, I don't like the return we got for him. I like Uyghur might be taxing our starting pitchers, our three young starting pitchers, which is not a good thing. We have one of them with injury issues in Nick Lodolo. So I really dislike this from a big picture standpoint. I think the talent they got back wasn't that great. All things considered, it was all guys who have been struggling or having problems, or like I said, Ovis Portez, who's just so far away for right now that it's it doesn't really matter. So yeah, I'm very out on this deadline. I'm very out on the idea that the Reds got better. Again, I will concede that like, hey, maybe they stayed the same. Maybe that's fine if you want to say that, but when we look at the fact that I don't even Rob, who's our fifth starting pitcher? And if we're going to bring up a fifth starting pitcher, we have Graham Ashcraft on the IL, we have Brandon Williamson on the IL, Rhett Lauer isn't ready. Clearly, he's not doing well in the minor leagues. Connor Phillips still has one of the worst seasons
Well,
of all
Rhett
time.
Lauder's been really good
It's
for the
that's
last
what's
3 weeks, to give him credit.
he has been, but he's still not ready. He's still not coming up, and
I
he's still had an awful season by his standards. So that's the problem here. Is I think there's going to be too much tax on our starting pitchers, and I don't know. Like it's good to take these low cost options to see if they do work out and get back to their best form. Whether it's Joey Weimer being a big prospect and just never figuring it out at major league level, or Ty France who's had this one bad year. It's just so weird that they would DFA him when he's been so good for them in the past. Even made an All Star game, even though that All Star year for him wasn't even that good, to be honest. But that's what bothers me. It was an overall strategy, but I don't even know like the way things are with the Reds. I don't even know if this team got better right now. I don't even know if they got better for the future. That's the frustrating thing here, and I just really don't want to see our guys get hurt because that is the fastest way to take these young promising guys and then see them not work out. You mentioned McLean. If Lodolo becomes that guy too, which he has been, when McLean and Lodolo have both been the guys who have been injured, that goes from an exciting young core to oh shit, we may have screwed this up because now we have two guys who are always injured, and that's not where we want to be. So again, it's cool that they tried the low cost options. I'm cool with that. We'll see what happens. And at this point, and I think it is very much a hey, we're not competing. We're going to see if these guys work out. But they told us they're competing, and that's also a problem.
Yeah, I'll hear you out. I mean, I will say I'm not ready to give up on somebody like a Weimer yet when he's not even played a full season of baseball in his career. So he literally only played for last year and he just turned 25 this year. So I'm not too out on him yet, especially because apparently he's been changing his swing up all season. So, and he was apparently raking in AAA before he came over, is what I forget which broadcasters were. I think I might have been even listening to the Brewers game. Somebody was saying that he's been raking in AAA um, for the last like couple of weeks. So, which doesn't matter. I mean, ultimately, but I'm not going to give up on that guy yet. I think he could be interesting. Obviously, the Brewers were willing to give up on him for Frankie Montas. I mean, that's a pretty clear sign, but I just don't want to like totally write him off, and I don't even want to write France off. So it may just be a difference of opinion of those two players, I think more specifically, but I don't think the weird part is I don't think you're wrong. You've kind of convinced me on how bad it was. I'm just trying to be hopeful that these two guys can compete for a spot next year because I think that's going to be important. Like we got to have guys competing for next season, and I think it starts now. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. But are there any last thoughts on the trade deadline before we move on? Because we got two more, I think, more interesting or not more interesting, better topics in terms of hopefully
Yeah.
happiness.
It's just last thought. This is audition season for all these
Mhm.
guys for next year. I think for Ty France and Joey Weimer. Now, here's the thing. I would love to have Joey Weimer up at the major league level and see what he can do. He's 25. Next year he'll be 26. At that point, you start thinking about giving up on guys, in my opinion. Like, if they're not hitting well at 26 years old, as we mentioned before, that's, 25 to 32 is kind of your prime baseball. That's a concern. So I want to see Joey Weimer up and hitting, and I don't care if we have to send down Will Benson or someone to do it. That's
Yeah,
what I think needs to happen. And it could turn into, hey, we don't want to go up on these guys, but they have these last 2 months of the season to really prove what they can do. And then maybe if they hit in spring training next year, maybe they can battle for a spot. Uh, but I think right now, if you look at things, it's trending the wrong way, and that's the problem. But
yeah,
give him the rest of the season. Bring up Joey Weaver, see what he can do. I would love to have the rest of this season be Let's see what Ty France, Joey Weimer has, and then we'll get to what we were looking for the rest of the season with some of these other guys. But that would be my biggest thing is, hey, don't give up on them yet, but just have the expectation that it may not work out based on how things are going right now. But if they come here and they play well, you can earn your spot on this team. No one is hitting the ball as much as we thought they would this year. If they want to hit the ball, they want to be the guy who steps up. More than happy to see that happen. I think you are
Yeah,
too,
no,
man.
I completely agree. I completely agree with you on that one. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I just the one that worries me the most right now, honestly, is the Ty France thing because I think he could be interesting, but that makes me wonder what they think of CES at this point. If they ultimately end up keeping him, because we have too many options for first base at the moment. You have Stevenson, CES, India, Candy, Steer, and now Ty France. And Ty France can really only DH or play first base. He's not. I know he's played some third base in his career, but like if you're relying on Ty France at third base, then I don't know. He's a great first baseman, though. From what I can remember, he's like almost a Gold Glove caliber first baseman. So um, it makes me wonder about what the long term and even short term of Christian Encarnacion Strand is looking like at this point. Not that you give up on a guy that young for a guy like Ty France, but it's an interesting thought experiment that we're gonna have this offseason, Joe, for sure. Um, all right, moving on here. Hunter Greene. I'm going to give you some stats, Joe. You and the people. He is currently now second in the National League in ERA. These are all National League, so I guess I'll preface that. Fifth in WHIP, fourth in Ks, first in batting average against. He does have the most walks for starting pitchers, so. But second in innings pitched, second in runs given up in the least amount. And in my opinion, it's time to put him in the Cy Young race officially. It's got to be him, Dylan Cease, Chris Sale, and Ranger Suarez to me. There are people who are putting the young man from Pittsburgh, but I don't know if Paul Skeens is going to have enough games to do it, unless if he is just like a 1 ERA through the rest of the season, then I could maybe see it happening. But he has literally half the games of all the rest of these guys. Realistically, I don't even know if Dylan Cease should be in it. He's got a 3.5 ERA, but he did throw a no hitter and he's been throwing relatively well, so he may bring that down by the end of the season. But I really think it should be between Hunter Greene, Chris Sale, and Ranger Suarez. I don't know if that's going to end up happening. We'll have to see how the rest of the season plays out. But Joe, he is on one. I don't know if I've seen a guy like this in terms of dominance since the Volquez days when he was really good in the conversation, and then obviously the Johnny Cueto days when he probably should have won a Cy Young award. I forget which year it was, but one of his last years here in Cincinnati, he should have won a Cy Young award that year, and he got screwed because he's from a small market. And I feel like that's going to happen to Hunter Greene right now too, because almost none of the rest of those guys who I named are top five in any major statistics. Like they are throughout individual ones, but I don't think that they all are basically top five in the major stats like Hunter Greene is right now. And if he continues to dominate, if he drops that ERA to like a 2.5 by the end of the season, Joe, and this man doesn't win a Cy Young, I may that may also cause me to have an aneurysm.
Yeah, I'm glad that my bold prediction is paying off and that he's in the Cy Young race. I think that's all we can ask of him. Keep on, pitching well and developing. I would throw out Zach Wheeler as another guy who could possibly win it. 0.98 WHIP, a 2.77 ERA, 11 and 5. He's right behind Chris Sale and ERA in the National League. So those are the guys. I think you summed it up pretty well. I think Dylan Cease is too far out of it, to be honest. But I wouldn't be surprised if they just kind of like, oh, well, he threw into a hitter and he's pitching
That's
well at the end of
exactly
the
it.
season.
Hmm.
I think yeah, I do think Paul Skeens, if he pitches the rest of the year and pitches the way he has been, he deserves to be in the discussion. He came up, I believe, in May, so
Hmm.
he's had almost a full season, a month
Yeah,
off. So I would accept that argument if he pitches the way he has for the rest of the way. Um, I would love to see Hunter Greene win the award. I do think a lot of it is based on big markets and teams who do well. If you're not in a big market, and that's going to work against him. But his development's been insane. He deserves to be in the race. He deserves to keep on getting the long leash by David Bell to go longer into games and to improve these stats, get more strikeouts, hopefully get more wins because we've seen when he gets taken out of some games, like it was on Saturday, gets taken out. And as soon as he does, things became to get in doubt really quickly. They go up some runs right after he came out of the game. So excited for him. He definitely needs to be in the conversation. I I I don't know how it's going to go. I think some of the guys in the bigger markets on playoff teams are probably going to steal a lot of the votes. But again, he's got a couple months here, 2 months of baseball left, a lot of time. If he pulls that ERA down even further, if he gets more strikeouts, maybe, the Reds go on a little run and make it a little bit more competitive where they get some attention, I could see him winning the award. It's going to take a lot, though, for sure.
I was going to say, I think what he needs is one complete game. I think if he gets a complete game, one run or shutout, I think that puts him squarely more in the conversation. MLB Network was talking about him as a Cy Young candidate. I think it was after his last start. I had already made this and put him as a topic of conversation before that game, even. But um, I think he
Yeah.
deserves to at least be in the conversation. And then if he can do it again next year, I mean, look, as down as Joe and I are about certain things with the Reds, the one thing that you should know as Reds fans are if you can have great starting pitching, which the Reds have three very solid arms so far. I may argue that Carson Spires could be a fourth if he continues what he's doing this season. If he keeps his ERA hovering below a 3.5 ish, for the rest of the season, then that is a very, very good person to be a number five starter if we do not think that Chase Burns is going to be ready or Rhett Lauder. So um, they may have four, but at least three good arms. And then you have a superstar in the making in Ellie De La Cruz. The guy's 22. He's even going through a little bit of a meh stretch. I think if he had even a decent week hitting wise this week, Joe, the Reds may have truly won another game, which could have been very impactful for them. But regardless, um, there are very good positives, and you can build a team around an ace starting pitcher and a superstar shortstop. You got to find the pieces to do it, and they will accumulate those pieces. But we've talked about it last week. Is it going to be 25? Is it going to be 26? It's starting to look more and more like it might be 2026. I thought they were going to do more at the trade deadline than they did, honestly, to set things up for 2025. But we'll have to see how the offseason goes. But um, it's been really cool to see Hunter Greene turn into this guy that I think is going to do this for a very, very long time. And if he does, there's a real world where like this man, I'm not going to try to get too far ahead of ourselves, but at least a Reds Hall of Famer, if this guy can be that, because we will see somebody who looks like he has the potential to be more dominant than even the best Johnny Cueto days, which is wild to me. I thought Johnny Cueto might be one of the best Reds pitchers I see in my lifetime. And I think Hunter Greene has the opportunity to be better than even he is or was.
Yeah, and we're an organization that, I mean, for how long we've been around, doesn't have the best pitching history, right? Because we had
Mm-hmm.
Johnny Cueto, was the last 20 game winner for the Reds. Before that was Mario Soto in the 80s. The Big Red Machine was built on their offense. They had some good pitchers, don't get me wrong, but everyone knows the offense and the players in the field. So it's exciting to see. And one of the stats you didn't mention, Rob, that I follow even for pitchers is WAR 5.1. He
Yeah,
leads the league in WAR. That's both National and American League. Over Tariq Skubal is having a fantastic season for the Tigers.
yep,
That's something that, like all the guys you mentioned, he is almost like
like
a
almost
game above them,
2 points
if
ahead.
not more.
Yeah,
Yeah, so like Paul Skeens is 3.8, so 5.1 for Hunter Greene. I think it does matter if we're going to start taking these advanced test statistics into account for pitcher for the batters. Let's do it for the pitchers too. And I think having him lead the team in WAR is pretty fitting for how he's pitched this year. I'm excited. Wish he could get more wins on his record. I think we've gotten to the point where wins don't matter for starting pitchers, but you just like to see it. I love to see him get more run support and be able to push that number up. I do think some of the old time baseball writers still look at that when they vote, but for the most part, we understand that like it's not his fault that he's losing games. He's only 8-4. That's something we'll have to figure out.
yeah. I mean, look, he could have 12 or 13 wins by the end of the season. Like, who cares? Like, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's not his ultimate fault that the Reds bullpen continuously. He's had so many no decisions this year because the offense doesn't hit well and the bullpen just doesn't do their job. I mean, he's even had some terrible defense behind him at different points. Like, I'm not blaming him for that whatsoever. I think you got to look at the full culmination of a season. And even as a Reds fan, like if I look at it by the end of the season, as much as I loathe the fact that we're gonna have to see Paul Skeens be just this dynamite guy in the division for so long, look if that dude does what he is doing for the rest of the season and keeps his ERA below like a 2 like he is right now, then all credit to him. If he gets a WAR of like a 6 in his first season, that dude is scary good. He scares me, Joe. I told people it's like watching somebody throw a bowling ball. His ball is so heavy. He's going to break a million bats, I feel like, in his career. As long as, knock on wood, he stays healthy. I'm a baseball fan too. I'm a Reds fan first, baseball fan second, but I do love to watch really good pitching. And Paul Skeens is that without a doubt. Um, all right, Joe, we'll head into our last topic here before we do a quick breakdown of the Marlins and Brewers series. Why are you watching for the rest of the season? Like what should we be? So we did the why last week. I'm going to say what should you be watching for? Reds fans at this point, if they're watching or listening to this podcast, if they're still watching the Reds after the no-hitter on Friday, because that's normally a pretty good time for, a more casual fan, I'll call them. Not a true fan, but a more casual fan to step away. Why should you be watching? I have a couple of topics. I think Hunter Greene Cy Young race, I think, is worth watching for. I think if Matt McLain can come back healthy, that's going to be worth watching for here, especially over the next few weeks. Can Lodolo stay healthy and figure out the small issues that he's been having over the last few weeks? Same thing with Abbott. And then, like you said, it's a tryout, Joe. Here are the only people who I know are going to have starting positions come next season. Tyler Stevenson at catcher, Matt McLain at second base, Ellie De La Cruz at shortstop, and TJ Friedel in the outfield. That's it. Those are the only four players that I am very certain will have a starting position next year. There are more I think you could consider, but in terms of the infield and outfield, I think there are question marks at first base, third base, left, and right field. Now, to be clear, Spencer Steer is also a starter. I just don't know where he's going to be, is the reason why I don't have him in there. So
Yeah.
I wanted to be clear on that. I don't know if he's going to be starting in the outfield, if maybe they decide to look at him at third base because they don't feel like people are getting the job done and they like Ty France at first base. Like, I don't know where he goes necessarily, but Spencer Steer is also the fifth guy. I should say the fifth guy, but I just don't know where he starts. I know he will start, but where, I don't know. So you have 5 out of your 9 positions figured out, including the DH. I feel like you could maybe pencil in India as well. I wouldn't put him in pen, but I think with the season he's having, he's worth it. Probably could put Candelario in there as well, but even those two I think are question marks because there was apparently a lot of push for Candelario, and I think the reason they did not move him was because they wanted to give this facade of allowing the team to go for it. And I think if he gets interest in the offseason, I could totally see them moving him. But Joe, where are you at with what what are you watching for, and then the tryouts?
Yeah. I think tryouts and Hunter Greene, Cy Young are good calls. Just every game, see what he can do. And it's funny because I think this question changes. Like growing up, when some of the teams, sometimes this team's made the playoffs, but like, you'd have like Brandon Phillips playing second base. You don't want to miss a game with Brandon Phillips playing second base, or Joey Votto trying to hit 300 or break some records or win the MVP, even when the Reds weren't as good. I think in that vein, I think want to see Ellie De La Cruz play baseball
Mm-hmm.
every day, running the bases, defense. Not as good as Brandon Phillips' defense. Brandon Phillips is the best defensive second baseman of all time, but he still makes some incredible plays that even Brandon Phillips can't make. So that's pretty good to note. So I'm watching his defense. I'm watching these tryouts, and I like what you said, Rob, about 5 starters and figuring out where Steer is. But that also gives you flexibility for free agency.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to get a big time third baseman, if you want to get a big time first baseman, left fielder, and then you move Steer around based off that, and India as well, because I do think with how much they love India, I do think he'll be a starter. We don't know where again, so that's kind of one of those questions. But my specific interest is in third base, Noel V. Marte.
Mm-hmm.
But you have 6 miles an hour off of your exit velocity. That's not good. I mean, for guys coming off steroid suspension, that's not good. You're not seeing the ball very well. You have old fans like my dad saying you're a bust because you wear yellow cleats, and that, as far as we can tell, that might be true because that's what's happening right now. But as you mentioned earlier in the show, Rob, we don't know what CES is going to be because he's hurt, right? We don't know if he's going to be the guy next year. We don't know if we're going to move on from him, whether Ty France is going to take a spot, if it's to be platooned. We have no idea. Marte, we need to see something here, man. Like
Hmm.
before we can plan for the future, we need to see what he's going to do. Batting 168 right now hasn't looked good. Give him the rest of the year as an audition as well. We talked about some of the guys we got, but I also think it's an audition for him. And
Yep.
for a guy who had so much promise, we might have to cut ties very quickly if we want to win, and that's what sucks. Like, hey, maybe not cut ties and like, hey, we cut him or like we trade him. Maybe he's like a backup for us or something, and that's something I don't think we want to do. But I mentioned we have all this talent, all this young talent, and like one of the things that can derail it is injuries, right? With Lodolo and McLean, like if they keep on getting hurt, that is going to make things disastrous for the future. And I hope they can stay healthy as much as the next guy. For CES, the one time injury, I'm not going to say he's injury prone, but like, can he hit the ball when he comes back? That's huge. Marte, because he's healthy, I think I'm watching him more than anyone. You need to get that batting average up the end of the year. Otherwise, it might be, hey, we do go get that free agent third baseman. Steer, you're in left field. Candy, you're at first base next year. Friedel, you're in center. Hopefully, we get a free agent right fielder at that point too. But that's just something to think about too. I do think these next couple of months, the most interesting player to me is figuring out if Noelve Marte is the real deal and show signs of development. All that stuff I think is very interesting to see here.
Yeah, and he better play every day. His bat. I don't care. The defense he can figure out. He will, I think. I think he's young, and I'm going to give him an opportunity. I will say if he can hit 250 for the rest of the season. Now, I'm not saying his entire batting average goes up there, but if he's getting to hit one out of every four times starting this week for the rest of the season, good. Then you know you have something to work with because Ellie De La Cruz is doing that right now, and he's still electric. People forget Marte can steal bases too, Joe, at a pretty high rate. Like he has as much power as Ellie does, I think, in a more traditional sense. And I think his bat to ball skills are generally better. He just has to learn to stay away from from the breaking ball outside. If he can do that and stop swinging at the up and in pitch in terms of like early in the count and getting himself out early, those are things that you have time to learn. And I want to see him do that over the next 2 months. That you're right. He is absolutely at the top of my list as well if we're looking for the tryout guys. Um, because I think he can. And let's not forget too, I think a lot of people are not going to think about this, but I think Edwin Arroyo could have been ready at this point if he had had the full season to actually be healthy and not worry about it. He was hitting the ball very, very well in spring training. Um, his defense is one of the best on the team. Um, there's a chance that he could be the guy that moves Ellie to third base. His defense is that good, to be honest. Like people don't want to hear that, but that could be the move that ends up happening. Or McLean goes to third base because he's got the arm, but he's just I don't know. We'll have to see. We're gonna have to figure out the infield here very shortly. But if Marte doesn't do well, do not fret because Edwin Arroyo is a very slap hitter, like strong contact bat who is really, really, really good defensively and has a good eye. And he is definitely going to be a guy I'll be watching for next season. Not this season, but Marte's got to prove that he can do it before Arroyo comes back healthy and does his thing because I think that's the biggest threat to his playing time now and or for next year specifically.
Yeah, you make a good point with Arroyo. I think next year maybe they start him at AAA, and then if he hits well there, they bring him up because that's probably where he'd be right now if things didn't get injured. But I'm excited. I think in another way too. I think Reds fans probably not watching minor league games. You can if you have MLB, the package or whatever. But we have the 24th ranked farm system in baseball based on I forget who just said the rankings, but 24th. And I think we found out to be true. Right, the top of the farm system pretty bad. We don't have guys ready to bring up, and there's a lot of guys who have issues. So yeah, just try, like Arroyo would. He's not coming back this year, but like find guys who might be able to help this organization in the future. See if the guys like Connor Phillips can figure it out. I think is also very important to this team because yeah, we're going to fill spots around Ellie and Hunter Greene in the next couple of years. Maybe it's Rhett Wilder, maybe it's not. If he can keep on pitching well, maybe it's Connor Phillips. He figures it out. Probably not, just the way he's pitched. But let's see some of these young guys take steps forward because the one thing we did have was a great farm system, and all those guys are up now, and we need to replenish that. And we didn't do it at the trade deadline, so that's something else to kind of not watch, but track the rest of the way and see if we can find some diamonds in the rough and see who can help us in the next couple of years.
I couldn't agree more, Joe. All right, we move on here to the games this week. We've got the hapless Marlins for 4 games in Miami, Joe. We don't know exactly who's going to be starting some of these games right now, Joe. We do know that it's going to be somebody today. I don't know who it's going to be, Joe, but it's going to be somebody. Then you have Lodolo Abbott. I did mess this up. It is going to be Lodolo Abbott and Green for the last three games of this series. Then it'll be Spires question mark Lodolo for the Brewers. I'm just saying that now because I have it wrong in my notes. We don't know who their closer is. They traded away pretty much everybody on their team. Their lineup consists Xavier Edwards, Jake Berger, Jesus Sanchez, Jonah Bride, Kyle Stowers, Emmanuel Rivera, Nick Gordon, Vital Brujan, Ali Sanchez, excuse me, Nick Fortes, David Hensley, and Otto Lopez. And I think there's one other person, but I could not figure out who it was based on their depth chart and everything else. Um, Look, there's their payroll, their current payroll. Let me look this up real quick because it is hilarious at this point. If you think the Reds are trying to save money, oh boy, this Marlins team is going to have to go out and make some big acquisitions. Now, I will say their starting pitching is very good, but on their active roster, they have one person right now who is making over $1 million. It is Jesus Sanchez. Their total payroll is pretty miserable. Now, to be fair, they have a lot of guys on the injured list. Sandy Alcantara is making close to 10 million. Jesus Lazardo, 5.5. You've got guys like Yuri Perez, Sixto Sanchez, and Ryan Weathers, Braxton Garrett. All their starting pitchers are basically hurt, so they just gave up on the season and traded everybody. Um, Joe, I'm just going to be honest. I don't care who they throw out there. I don't care who's in their lineup. Pitch around Jake Berger and Jesus Sanchez. That's it. That's it. And you should win all four games in this. This team is absolutely god awful. If they win more than 2 out of every 10 games for the rest of the season, I will be shocked. There are young guys with promise on this team, but we're catching them right when they're just coming up. To be clear, now they did have a good weekend against the Braves. They won 2 of 3 against the Braves, which was I think a surprise to literally everybody. But if the Reds truly want a chance to come back in, this has got to be it.
Yeah, this is if you're still holding on to hope, which again you can mathematically, it's still very possible. And if you look at the Pythagorean win percentage, we should be in the playoff hunt right now. But this is your last stand, though. Like this is your last chance. I think if you like somehow screw this series up and lose it, go 2-2, and then you have to go play the Brewers after that. That's not a good recipe for success. I'm not saying it can't happen still at that point, but I think this is your like, hey, we win 4 against the Marlins. Like, hey, maybe we get something going now. This is a terrible baseball team. Reds fans, it does get worse than what we have. The Marlins
Yep.
traded away everyone, as you said, Rob, and the White Sox too on a 20-game losing streak right now. Important to note that. But I respect what the Marlins did. They noticed they weren't going to be good, and they sold. They got a lot of players coming in. They sold a lot of their relievers. The bullpen was really good. Now it's not good because they got rid of everyone. But respect what they did instead of like the White Sox kept some guys who are just not going to be good by the time they get there. So we talked a lot about buying and selling in the Reds. Marlins, I think you handled it well. You're going to lose a lot of games the rest of the way. As you mentioned, there's not many good bats. Pitch around the guys in the middle of the lineup. I think you're fine. I'll take 3-1 in this series. We have 3 of our best pitchers going up against them. I will take those games. It should be 4-0, but I will leave the one game just because something always seems to go wrong.
I'm going 4-0 because they have to do it. I just don't think there's any other excuse at this point. I just think you have to. I'm going to predict it. I think they know this, and I think they're going to go into Miami today and take care of business. So I'm going to go 4-0. We're going to move on to the Brewer series, Joe, because I just don't think there's much to look at in terms of that Marlins series. This one's the bigger one. Spires, like I said, question mark, whoever starts today probably, and then Lodolo. Um, their lineup consists something of Jackson Churio, who's been hitting well, Blake Perkins, William Contreras, Willie Adames, Gary Sanchez, Reese Hoskins, excuse me, Sal Frelick, Joey Ortiz, Bryce Terang, Eric Haas, Jake Bowers, Andrew Monasterio, and Garrett Mitchell. You'll be noticing that uh, Christian Yelich is not there. He is hurt. He may be out for the season. We don't know. He's been having a back injury that has been causing issues, Joe. Um, this team is very good. The Reds have not played against them well this year, but they're not necessarily great. either. They've been the most confusing team for wins for me at times. It feels like they get carried by weird players at different times. It feels like a lot of things are going right for this team. That being said, we are going into their house. I'm going to pray for a 1-2. That's my hope. If we can go 1-2 and finish the week 5-2, I will be ecstatic. Truly, I'll be like, okay, we have a shot. Um, I think I think if you lose all three, then the Marlins series ultimately just does not end up mattering. So, um, I'm gonna go with a 1-2. I'm just gonna say it now. I think Spires or Lodolo pitch a really they twirl up a really good game. And I think the offense comes alive against one of their starting pitchers. We don't know who's going to be starting yet for them, but um, the offense finds a way to come alive as they do most series, at least one game. Probably not the Sunday game because apparently we're just terrible on Sundays this year. But Friday or Saturday, we find a way to figure it out. Maybe they roll with the momentum from the Marlins series and go into it and win the Friday game as well. So that's where I'm going to go with it, Joe. I'm going to try to be hopeful again this week and see where we land.
Yeah, you mentioned getting the Brewers at a good time, just not good that we have to go to their place. Yelich would be eligible to come off the IL. Probably not going to happen. It's a back injury that's plagued him before. I think surgery in the offseason is going to happen, but yeah, I don't expect to see him. I think it's going to take a little bit more rest and rehab. They just put him on the 10-day IL just to have some flexibility with the end of the year. That's important. The Brewers have had a lot of starting pitcher injuries, and that's why they ended up trading for Frankie Montas. They're like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
let's get an arm who can need innings, and I respect the move from what they did. Obviously, we have Woodruff gone, Wade Miley, Dale Hall, another starter I think is hurt as well, and then 5 bullpen guys hurt as well. So again, it's we get some of these times where we say, oh, Reds, we have injuries, but like this other team has injuries too, and they fought through. The good news for them is a lot of their lineup has stayed healthy a lot of the year besides Yelich, and that has been
Mm-hmm.
crucial to them. In this series, it'll be important to pitch around William Contreras and Amelia Adames. He's only hitting 246, Adames is, but I think he's
Kills
proven
me.
he can be a Reds killer. Yeah, it's kind of the best way to put that. So you could pitch around some of the guys in the lineup, especially with Yelich out of it. For this, I'm going to go 1-2 record. I think if the Reds had played anything like they did last year, this year, like winning 1-run games or having relievers we really trusted, I could say 2-1 and feel pretty confident. And even if they played earlier this year, like when we had that winning streak, I would say, hey, maybe we can do it. I just haven't seen that from the Reds in a long, long time. So I will say 1-2, which puts me at 4-3 for the week. Not a bad week, but when you're trying to make up, 5 games under 500, that's just not going to be good enough.
Yeah, sadly, it will not get it done, but we'll have to see, guys. Let us know what you think in the comment section below, and we thank all of you who are listening on Apple Podcast and on Spotify. And Joe, I think that's going to wrap it up for us. You got any last words of wisdom for our listeners?
I got nothing. Just excited to watch all these tryouts the rest of the year.
Yeah, me too. That's going to be the main thing I'm going to be watching for as well. But we hope that you guys enjoy. Have a great day. And with that, we'll catch you on the next one.